Hello, everyone. This is the Free American Press with your host, Alexander. Today, we are having an economist on the show named Robert Wenzel. Hello, Robert. Thank you for being on the show.
Hey, Alexander, how are you?
I'm doing good. Can you tell the viewers a little bit about yourself?
Okay, sure. My background, essentially, I worked on Wall Street on various different investment banking type projects and have been for about the last 15 years now publishing economicpolicyjournal.com and commenting on the economy, wrote a couple of books on the economy, and that's the short Reader's Digest version. I'm really no longer doing much as far as investment banking unless something really comes to me that's real easy to do. But for the most part, I'm focusing on spreading the word on sound economics and warning about what's developing in the economy, given the policies that most of the governments are tending to implement at the present time.
Yeah, definitely. So, what is the state of the U.S. economy today?
Well, Alexander, I'll tell you, the state of the economy is a mess. Uh, Basically, what we have is a Federal Reserve that is printing incredible amounts of money. It's totally irresponsible. The only way an economy grows is by producing goods and services. The more goods and services that are produced, the higher the standard of living is of a country or an economy. And right now, we have a situation where uh, the Federal Reserve and literally most of the advisors um, of the president, and this goes back, it's the same thing under President Trump, but certainly under President Biden. Uh, they think you can just print money and that somehow helps the people. That's ridiculous. In the law, it really actually distorts the economy because money when it's printed always flows in certain directions, and when it flows in those certain directions, it distorts the way the money would normally hit an economy. And then when that flow stops for whatever reason, the economy tends to shift back to the other way. So it's just creating more volatility, more havoc, and you get the inflation problem, which distorts uh, the flows and really hurts people who are on fixed income. I mean, the amount of money that's been pumped into the economy over the last 12 months is just it's record breaking. We haven't seen anything like this since the sort of the World War II period, and I expect significant price inflation in the not too distant future.
Yeah, definitely. So, do you believe the Federal Reserve is essentially making money out of nothing?
Oh, that's exactly what they're doing. They do it in a very complex manner, but it amounts to the same thing. What they do is the Treasury will issue Treasury debt, and the Federal Reserve is not allowed to buy the debt directly, but they deal with what is known as primary dealers. And these primary dealers, and they include the normal cronies, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, people like that. And what the uh, primary dealers do is buy debt, and then the Treasury will buy debt from them, and they just really write a check, or really they just it's a digital electronic balance sheet entry, and they pay the primary dealers with the money, and then it works its way into the system. Then what happens is not only is that money gone into the economy, that's called sort of super money, uh, but then banks make additional loans on top of it, so you can have incredible amounts of money going into the system. Now, I also have to rush to say that also another way it's being done at the present is the Treasury had uh, at the beginning of the month 1.3 trillion balance with the Federal Reserve, and I liken that to a a token that you would walk around with in a Las Vegas casino. You know, you got it, you can cash it in a chip anytime you want, a casino chip, and that's what Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, is doing at this point to fund the latest stimulus package that Biden has put out, the 1.9 trillion. She's taking it down very, very quickly. She took it down by between 200 and 300 billion alone last week. And what that does is that she just writes a check again where there really isn't really money there. She's just got this balance with the Federal Reserve, and then the Federal Reserve backs up that money, and then that money gets into the system. So they're doing it in complex ways. So it's very, very difficult for the average person to understand. And it takes me what, a couple of minutes here to explain it, and it's really not any different than just uh, starting up the printing presses and printing the money. Same basic concept.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing that I saw that is really important is where the Federal Reserve is injecting the money to. And I actually saw that the Federal Reserve is just a small group of private bankers. So do you believe that this Federal Reserve is injecting money into certain corporations or certain areas where they want to enrich themselves and their friends?
Well, yeah, it's very misleading the way the structure of it. First of all, because there's the Federal Reserve uh, Bank that is located in Washington D.C., which really sets the policy rules, and then there are um, different banks, different districts, regional districts, and it was structured that way primarily for political reasons to make sure they get certain votes when uh, the vote
Election.
came up to pass the Federal Reserve Act. And so basically you had different banks in different sections, but they're really under the control of the Washington D.C. bank. In the old days, the New York Federal Reserve was very powerful, but now all the power is with the Federal Reserve Bank. Now the bank itself, it was really not the kind. It's not structured in a way where the money printing benefits them directly, other than for whatever offices and whatever money they're spending. But it does benefit those that are very, very close to the uh, center of power and those that influence the Federal Reserve. So the there's a good part of Wall Street that actually raises money and funds uh, new ventures and promising ventures that have been around a while. However, there's a crony part of Wall Street that just basically works with the Federal Reserve and benefits from the Federal Reserve pumping all this money in. Now, again, I mentioned these primary dealers. What the primary dealers do is buy from the Federal Reserve, get a commission. Buy from the Treasury, get a commission, and sell it to the Federal Reserve. They can sell it in the open market too. There's many places they can sell it, but the idea is they're earning commission off of all this money printing that's going on. So it's not that they necessarily are part of the ownership structure of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is really a government institution in the sense that the key members of the board are the governors are nominated by the president of the United States, and they're the most powerful members. And then the regional people come up through the ranks of the region, but they're not significant in terms of being outside the Federal Reserve structure. The influence that is put on all these members together is important. And that tends to be the Wall Street crowd, who generally are in favor of the money printing, because then there's more trading that goes on, more financing that goes on, and they benefit because there's a lot of commission because of that, and they can finance different projects. And the banks actually are able to loan more money. So the structure of the system is, again, it's very, very complex. The reason they do this is to make it confusing so the average person doesn't understand what's going on. But it's a Federal Reserve Bank that is controlled by the sort of the government structure. Again, the chairman of the Federal Reserve and the board, the governors of the Federal Reserve, are all nominated by the president of the United States. And then you get the district ones that come up, and they have limited voting powers. But
Right.
then on top of this, you have the outside influences, which are Wall Street, which really don't necessarily um, own in terms of earning money from being involved with the Federal Reserve, but they make money because of the types of transactions that benefit from the types of Federal Reserve activity when they pump money and do things of that nature.
Yeah, definitely. They're all part of from what I was reading, that the members of the Federal Reserves are members of some of the largest banks in the world. So do you believe the Federal Reserve should be abolished?
Absolutely, absolutely. There was nothing before the Federal Reserve. The United States did have different banks, but if you go way back, there was such the economy did very very well under a gold standard, and there's no reason you couldn't go back to that again. The gold technically isn't really money right now because most people accept dollars as the currency and what they trade in, and you would just sort of leave it up to the free market, let it develop, and then you wouldn't have these situations. Whenever you've got a central power structure anywhere in the economy, there are powerful people who try to get to the central power to get things to go in their direction. And that's what you have with the Federal Reserve. You have a very, very powerful organization that has the ability to print money, essentially, and you get the powerful players that try and influence that. So I'm always against the creation of government central powers where it eliminates competition or anything like that. And that's essentially what we have with regard to the Federal Reserve.
Yeah,
So
that
yeah,
def-
we would be much better off with the situation of money that wasn't tied in with the government central power.
yeah, that definitely makes sense. Everything you said. So that brings me to my next question. Do you believe cryptocurrency is just a new way to make money out of nothing?
Well, cryptocurrency is an interesting thing. I mean, we've got an overall inflation right now, so all kinds of assets go up. I believe that it is basically going up because of the overall inflationary boom right now that's causing the stock market to go up. Gold and silver, I expect to start moving fairly soon, and so that's what you have. It's kind of an asset that is benefiting from inflation. The minute the Fed stops printing money, whenever that may be, cryptocurrencies are going to crash like all other assets. However, there's a couple of problems with cryptocurrency that do not exist with other inflation hedges, that do not exist with gold and silver. The first thing being that they're a cryptocurrency, despite what some people will say, is very, very trackable. It's not the type of situation where you can't track what's going on. And if you've got something that's trackable, it's very, very easy for a government to institute new regulations and say, hey, we've got you can't buy this or you can't do this or whatever. And if the only way you could not track a Bitcoin, say, for example, transaction is if you sort of did it one off one time and no one knew who you were or what you were doing with that trade. But the minute you start using it in everyday kind of trading, well, if you're going to go do it and go to the barber using it in your grocery store and everywhere else, you're going to leave a trail of who you are. If you pay the rent with it, bingo, you're dead. They're going to know exactly who you are. Pay your cell phone bill. It can't um, act as a medium of exchange without also being an extremely, extremely uh, powerful way to track people. Now, a lot of people use credit cards and checks to pay for a lot of things right now, but you can always go offline with the money with greenbacks now if you wanted to do something that you didn't want tracked. If we ever get to a situation where it's a digital currency like Bitcoin and you don't have alternatives, then you're going to be in a lot of trouble because then everything's going to be tracked. Uh, the 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 Silk Road Ross Ulbricht situation, where he got 2 years life, and I mean just terrible things that happened to him, is an example of what happens when you have a whole tracking. I mean, if he just did a one-off exchange, he the likelihood of him being caught or anyone tracking him, focusing on him, would have been close to zero. But because he did a regular kind of transactions, they were able to track where he was operating from, a library here in San Francisco, and they were able to get him, and we have the tragic situation with him now. So that's one problem. It's a very, very uh, trackable instrument. If the Federal Reserve ever introduces a Fed coin, and they sort of hint that they might be doing this, and then they take away all paper currency, then that's going to be the same thing. Everything's going to be trackable. People don't realize how dangerous that is because it opens up the ability to censor the buying of certain books, uh, foods, medicines, whatever it might be, because they're going to be able to track everything you do. So digital is bad. It's not a good idea at all. And then secondly, we have the problem of if the Federal Reserve ever decides to go and introduce a Fed coin, they're not going to want the competition of Bitcoin or anything else. And at that point, what's going to happen is the Federal Reserve, the government, at the behest of the Federal Reserve, will crack down on Bitcoins and ensure they never become mediums of exchange. So it's a very, it's going up now because it's an asset. I can understand why it's going up because everything's going up because of the inflation. But on the other hand, there are things that can happen that can make it very dangerous to hold because they could pull the plug on it anytime.
Yeah, definitely. And in theory, they could also co-opt Bitcoin as well, I think, if they
Yeah,
want.
that too.
Yeah. So when will hyperinflation occur in the United States?
Well, that's an interesting question. And in hyperinflation, I would consider inflation that's, I don't know, at least 50% or 100% annualized, or maybe even 20%. But that's really high inflation. And it's not clear to me that that's going to happen at this point. At this point, I see, first of all, the Fed has a target of 2% inflation. For whatever bizarre reason they even want an inflation target, they have 2%. They have already stated they're going to allow inflation to run hot above that to 2.25, maybe 2.5%. But they don't realize that it's not going to necessarily move in such a slow pattern. They're looking back 10 years, 20 years at the most with regard to what inflation has happened. They don't look at the 1970s anymore because inflation really spiked to that period. But my thinking is that it will go to 3% first. And at that point, and this is within a couple of months to a few months, they'll go to 3%. They will not be concerned because they wanted to make up for inflation that was below 2%. It's really very bizarre thinking. So they'll allow it to go to 3%, not really be concerned. When it starts to get over 3%, they'll start to get concerned, but not concerned enough. Because at 3%, in order to stop the inflation at that point, you would need to raise short-term rates to around 5%. Now, the short-term rate, their target rate for the Fed funds rate, which is the rate that they control most directly, is 0.0% to 0.25%. So for them to raise it to 5% in any short period of time, that's not going to happen. That is a dramatic increase in the short-term interest rate in the Fed funds rate. Won't happen. So they'll get concerned once it gets to 3%, but then after 3%, what you're going to see is it quickly move to 5%. And then it's going to be a tiger by the tail situation. They'll increase interest rates maybe by that point to 3 or 4%, but when you got inflation at 5%, that's not slowing the inflation down for technical reasons. And so when it gets to 5%, it could really increase to 7 to 10%, somewhere along that line. And then they would take a rate of 12% or something like that to slow the inflation. Short-term rates, when Paul Volcker stopped the inflation in the 1970s, in the early 1980s, the short-term rates got to about 20%. So that's the kind of inflation you would have. You would have 3%, 5%, 10%. At some point, maybe they bring somebody in like a Paul Volcker, or these guys get religion and become Volckerists and really increase the rates. And so you would be cut off before there's hyperinflation. So I'm not necessarily of the view that hyperinflation could occur. It might, but I'm not saying it will for sure. I see 3-5% for sure, 10% very strong possibility, and then we have to see how the Federal Reserve reacts to that. If they continue irresponsible money printing like they are now, then sure you could get 20%, 30%. It could get out of control. Then we're in a whole other environment where
And
No one's going to want to hold money at all, and they're just going to want to uh, hold assets, any kind of asset. They're going
so
to spend their money right away.
one thing
Yep.
that I was just thinking, so basically, if inflation did get really bad, say there was hyperinflation, do you think the United States Federal Reserve and the US government would use that as a reason to switch over to a federal cryptocurrency to get people to turn in their dollars for that?
It's very, very possible. I mean, there's the old saying, never let a crisis go to waste. So it's very, very possible that could happen. You just don't know. It depends upon the specifics of the time. You could see price inflation again. That's a very, very real possibility. So I'm sorry, price controls, and that would make a mess out of things, really mess up the economy. So there's all kinds of things that could develop that are not good. I mean, the government regulations in these situations do not help things at all.
Yeah, definitely. So I actually just heard recently that uh, the IMF, the World Bank, just added around $500 billion. Have you heard of that? And what do you think of it?
Yeah, basically, I mean, what they're trying to do is create a global situation where all governments sort of inflate at the same time, all central banks inflate at the same time, and then you also have a situation where they want to control corporations and governments, and so they fund the IMF to do these kind of things for them. Um, there's the old book by John Perkins, the where we talked about how he would get countries to um, sort of borrow more than they could ever pay back, so that they could then go in and control the countries. So you have a lot of that. That's what's going on with the like the IMF and the World Bank, places like that.
Okay, so that's just a way for
Confessions of a economic policymaker, I think is the name of the book, something like that.
so that's just a way for the IMF to try to control other countries, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it's a way that the IMF is structured for the power countries of the world, especially the United States, to control other countries, to control whatever the powers that be, where the United States has an extreme influence to adjust for that.
Yeah, definitely. So do you believe the International Monetary Fund should be abolished?
I'm for abolishing anything that's a central power, and that's a central power. The problem with government central power is that bad guys always uh, aim to gain control of them, and driven bad guys will do anything to gain control. So they tend to be the people that gain control, and then they will use these things for their own various operations, and it's always extremely difficult to stop that. And that's what we see with the IMF. Whatever financing, whatever they're doing, it's to benefit cronies around the central power.
Yeah, definitely. So we talked a little bit about the gold standard, and that brings me to this question. What do you think will fix the US economy?
What would fix the U.S. economy?
Yes.
If they went back to pre-FDR, Woodrow Wilson period, where there was a lot more freedom and a lot less government agencies. Again, government agencies, whether it's the FDA, whether it's Department of Education, Department of Labor, whatever it is, it's a central power. Bad guys get in control of those things, and you see what happens. It distorts the economy, puts a hamper on innovation, puts a hamper on anybody trying to come up. It benefits the people that are in control now, and it really causes the economy to become much more sluggish, much more weak. And now we're with some of the policy advocacy we're seeing now, it really it could destroy the economy. I mean, the amount of printing that's going on, the amount of debt the Treasury is borrowing, this kind of stuff can't go on long term. It'll destroy the economy and turn it into a third world country. F.A. Hayek wrote a book called The Road to Serfdom, And I have often said that Hayek was an optimist by saying it's a road to serfdom. It's a road to much worse than serfdom. It's total destruction. And
Yep.
we're well on that road right now. And you can't always know exactly how the future is going to develop, but we've got a situation where there are uh, major trends developing to more central power. And unless something comes to stop that, we're going to be in a lot of problems. We're going to see
Yeah,
major problems.
yeah, so we're heading down a pretty scary path. And the question that's playing on most of the viewers' minds and my mind is how can we change this? How can we do what you said, go back to pre 1930 years in the economy? How can we change this?
Well, that's a very good question. And to really address that, you need to understand who's in control right now, who's influencing popular culture. And the people that are in charge are really Leninists. Okay. They have Leninist philosophy as far as strategy and tactics. And recently, the Patrice Cullors, who's one of the founders, co-founders of Black Lives Matter, on a radio show said she told the announcer that she was a trained Marxist. Now, most people focused on the idea that she was a Marxist, but that's something you could have picked up easy enough by just going to their website. They have their thinking is obviously totally Marxist. But when she said trained Marxist, she was talking to the host who was also a trained Marxist. And when she said trained Marxist, what she meant by that is she understood Leninist tactics and strategy. And that is vicious stuff. They will do anything, use any movement upcoming to advance their agenda. And their agenda is really, at this point, to destroy Western civilization. Critical theory is all about attacking everything. That's why they want to pull statues down and they don't want to stop. That's why they want to censor people who don't have the same views they do. That's why they're teaching students in school not to debate. They're teaching students that anybody that disagrees with them is evil. Well,
Yeah.
that's just a Leninist tactic. Lenin taught young kids not to have empathy, um, not to think in terms of emotion and what the other person might feel. He taught them specifically to think that your position, the socialist position, is the correct position, and if you oppose this kind of thinking and sort of open up to anybody else's views, you're a traitor. And that's the mentality they want to get across. So it's very dangerous. Most of the people that are sort of supporting this are people that really do not understand how dangerous it is. Because at the end of the day, when it's in Lenin's strategy is a strategy about gaining power. But the problem is that there's only one person, one very small group that gets to the top and controls everybody else. Everybody else gets really knocked off.
Yeah.
When you were as vicious as Lenin, I mean, it didn't matter. And Trotsky was probably one of the most sophisticated uh, operators at that time who worked with Lenin and then with Stalin. And he put together one of the military groups, understood the strategy like the back of his hand, and yet he ended up with the ice pick axe to the back of his head when Stalin took power, because Stalin did not want his views uh, to dominate. So these guys are playing an extreme power game, and anybody else, any of these corporate people that are attempting to sort of side with the woke culture, the social justice warriors, they don't understand how this works. They are not going to come out when they're being used as useful idiots right now. You can even see this now with what's going on with New York Mayor Andrew Cuomo. I mean, he was valuable to them as a counter to Trump. But now that Trump's out of the way, they're taking Cuomo out of the way to put somebody even more leftist in. These people do not play around. They're very dangerous. So to get your for that as a setting, to get to your question about what do we do, you have to, and I'm talking about using the same kind of methods. And this is a problem, because a libertarian will say, well, we believe in free speech, we believe in not harming anybody, we believe in the non-aggression principle. Well, that's true. But I pose this to you and to anybody who says, you can't sort of use Leninist tactics. And I say you can't use all of them, but some of them you have to use. Suppose someone comes up to you with a gun, a mugger, and he might even not only ask for your money, but he might decide to kill you, okay, if he's really deranged, okay? And you have a gun, so you can plug them and end the problem. Now, there would be no argument from a non-aggression principle. If someone is threatening like that with a gun to your head, that you can plug them. There's no problem with that. There's no way you can sort of decide at this point, hey, put your gun down because you're actually you've been stifled because of minimum wage laws and poor government education. You're not going to talk to this guy when he's got a gun to you. He doesn't hear that. He wants your money, and he might hate you. So because he might even be actually caught up in some of the cultural revolution stuff. So at that point, you would put a plug in their head. And I think the advance of the Leninist is so strong right now that we have to create the same kind of pain for them that they create for anybody who objects to what they're doing. So I'm not talking physical pain or anything like that. I'm just talking about really smart things. And it really doesn't make sense to discuss those in a YouTube, but to really cause them pain whenever they come up with something, whenever a corporation comes up with something that is clearly social justice warrior, cultural warrior stuff, that really behind it all is Leninist stuff. Well, now they only fear the blowback from social justice warriors if they sort of ignore a person's views. They have nothing to do whatever the product is, but they have to feel the pain in terms of, for lack of a better word, I don't think a strike is the best way to do it, but that sort of gives a sense for what you would do. Nike wants to do something social justice warrior. Well, go on strike. I mean,
Yeah,
there's better
don't buy
ways to
from
do.
them.
I'm sorry.
Don't buy from them.
Yeah, but there's more sophisticated ways to do it. I don't necessarily think strike is the right, correct thing to do. Very much like I don't think the storming of the White House, the Congress, was the Capitol, was the right thing to do, because basically what you had there was a situation where it didn't work, it wasn't planned, it wasn't thought out, and it really just gave the left another tool to suppress people who are looking for freedom. I mean, those people were generally freedom fighters in a way, but they did it completely wrong. Uh, you have to be extremely smart and clever about this stuff uh, to do it. And
Well,
storming of the Capitol is not the way to do it.
well, what I was going to say to that, I think that was planned because they let those people in too. So I think, like you said, they didn't really have, the thoughts about how to do it because it was a planned event that I think they wanted to do. Don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, it might have been planned, unplanned. I don't know, but the problem still is it did not make sense to do it that way, because all it has done is given more ammunition to the left for more crackdowns on people. Um, for I mean, some of these people, the guy who sat in Nancy Pelosi's chair, the poor guy can't even get bail. I mean, it was just sort of a, Vladimir Putin probably had the best explanation. It was a stroll. It wasn't like they're trying to label it as an insurrection, because what they want to
Yeah,
do is they want to create the idea
right.
that there's an extreme right that wants to overthrow the current democratic elected uh, Congress and president. And that's not I mean, there might be there's extreme righties and extreme lefties way out there, but those people weren't, had no plan to do anything
I
like that.
I think I think it was the police officers that let him in. But what you were saying earlier really makes sense though, because three aggressive people can take down, say 300 passive people. So if we're going to be passive to their aggressiveness, we're just going to fail, unfortunately, I think, like you were saying. So that brings me to my next question. Why are the powers that be leading us to this path of destruction?
Well, that's an interesting question. It's really about a power play. As far as the politically, like Nancy Pelosi, uh, people that are around Joe Biden, they just see the cultural trends right now, and they're just riding whatever's there that thinks that will keep them in power. That's Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi has no principles or anything like that. As far as the real puppet masters behind the scene, again, they're the Leninists. They come out of um, the Frankfurt School, which was a school that was founded between the two world wars. One of the most significant players, just to show you how they influenced things, was Herbert Marcuse. He was in part of the Frankfurt School, and he left Germany when Hitler was coming to power, came to the United States. Just to give you how important it is at the high philosophical level, how it sort of dribbles down from there. I mean, he's this philosopher, and he influenced Abby Hoffman. Credit when he Marcuse for a while, he taught at Yale for a while. He taught at Brandeis. Abby Hoffman studied under him, and credits him with developing a lot of his radical philosophy. And then Marcuse goes to the West Coast, curiously to the University of California, San Diego, which just had a big military base. So he was teaching a lot of people that sort of had uh, probably military in their family. It was just, I find it curious that he did that. But one of the key people that he taught and influenced, and she gives Marcuse a lot of credit for her views, is Angela Davis. So he went on the East Coast, got one of the key rabble rousers of the 1960s, 1970s. Abby Hoffman influenced him, then goes to the West Coast and influences Angela Davis, who became a key player in the Black Panthers and so on, is still a radical icon to this day. And so, so these kind of people, though, they're the ones that have this hardcore view that all of Western civilization has to be taken down. They're the ones that are closer to understanding what the real game plan is. Pelosi, she's surfboarding out there on a high wave, and just sees the wave. But the people that are the influencers, the Abby Hoffman, the current Abby Hoffmans, whoever are the strongest in terms of influence after him in Angela Davis and the real cultural revolutionaries, they're the ones that they want to destroy Western civilization. And it's because they're Marxists. Now it's interesting because the key thing to the Frankfurt School was, hey, Marx says it's going to be this revolution between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, but the economies have become so successful that the bourgeoisie are too fat and happy to start a revolution. So how are we going to bring about a revolution? And it actually started with a guy in Italy by the name of Gramsci, and they said, look, we have to do it culturally. The revolution is not going to happen because of economics, because everybody's too fat and happy. They're not going to throw this away. So we have to attack religion, family, media, destroy all this, and bring up these race problems, bring up gender problem, all this kind of stuff started from Gramsci, went to the Frankfurt School, and then was introduced here. And that's the stuff that's behind it. And these and they sort of have that Leninist ability to understand how to implement this in a strategic and tactical manner. So it's a power play. They want power, and they see their way to do that is to use the guidance from Gramsci, from Marcuse, and introduce that in. And you can see it's successful by what's really going on now in terms of this cultural revolution, the critical theory, the social justice warriors. That's all out of, and most of the people don't know. Most of the people are basically at useful idiot level. They have no idea the structure, what's going on behind these people, and what their final goal is power for them. And they are ruthless and they will do whatever it takes. I mean, we can just see from, when Trump was first elected, I wrote within a week of his election that it's the only people that's going to benefit are the socialists, because they had a really good foil, even though he wasn't a principal guy in terms of liberty or anything. It's far from that. But he was a great caricature of what a capitalist looked like, even though he's a minor player uh, at that, and really had no strong free market libertarian principles at all. But he was a perfect foil for the left, and we've seen the left emerge at an incredible rate during the Trump administration, and they took full advantage of this, and they're not stopping. They are trained not to stop, to grab as much as they can, and that's what they're doing. And hopefully some counter revolution comes about to stop them, because if it doesn't, it's going to be very, very bad for
Yeah.
most Americans, because
Yeah.
you're getting the economic problems at this time with the inflation coming up, and at the same time you're getting this cultural stuff where these people who the key people understand what they're doing, and they are not nice people.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing is that it seems that both the Republican Party and the Democrat Party are essentially the same, because they've been paid off by the same bankers, the same Federal Reserve, and it just seems like they're both heading towards the same destruction. So it does seem that we need a new political party to actually counteract this tyrannical stuff that's going on. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's necessarily a new political party. I mean, it could emerge that way, but it's more of an attitude. I mean, there's a really large part of the population here. You see all these Trump followers. They were just really misled by Trump. Trump really was not a free market guy. If Trump was a solid free market guy, we wouldn't be in the situation we are now. He would have really stopped the Federal Reserve. He wouldn't have made all. We would have never had the lockdowns. We would have never had all these checks going out that are these so-called stimulus checks that, under Trump we spent $4 trillion. I mean, that's insane. So that's not free markets at all. And Biden is just a continuation of Trump. He's using the same thing, send everybody checks. Well, there's no money behind these checks other than the Federal Reserve printing the money. So that's ridiculous. What you need is increases in the production of goods and services. This doesn't do this at all. It allows people to sit at home with this lockdown, and they're getting checks, so they go out and spend it. So, it sort of muted the uh, general instinct of people to fight against being oppressed, because Trump really gave them all these checks. It was the worst decision he made, the worst thing he did. Well, there were two things. Getting this stuff out was just terrible. There's no question about it. And the second thing is, when he went on TV initially with regard to the COVID virus, which, it's not a serious problem for 99.9% of the people. And he had these daily conferences, press conferences, with Fauci and Birx in the background. And that clued the Democrats in how to deal with this virus. And then you had Cuomo holding his conferences, and Newsom here in California. You had all these governors and mayors all holding press conferences, getting all kinds of coverage for battling. These guys have no idea how to
Yeah.
battle themselves out of a paper bag. They have no idea about viruses. But I mean, it made sense for Cuomo to get an Emmy, because he was acting. He has no idea what the hell he was doing as far as this battle. And the thing was, you just keep people locked down, make sure Trump's just sending money to everybody to stop the oppression, and act like a hero. You
Yeah.
know, that's
Uh,
that's the gameplay. And that was all Trump's fault. So uh, you got a situation where the Democrats and Republican, it's what they always do. They're looking for opportunities to present themselves as good people so that they can get the votes. And so they will pose in any way, whatever shape it is. So a new party is not necessarily a thing. It's got to be a cultural revolution in the minds of the people that are sort of Trump people that were misled. They need to understand, look, that was wrong. What you need to do is demand uh, somebody who's going to be in favor of liberty, and they'll develop if that sense comes about.
yeah,
But
I do agree.
I hasten to add, I got to cut you off, yeah, Alexander. The left is knocking on our door. It's a very, very dangerous time, and we may not have enough time to really create that cultural revolution where the sort of the masses uh, pull up. We have to use tactics that are very strong. The left, and again, I don't mean anything illegal or physical or taunting to these people, but the left, the extreme left that is running this program needs to be burned every time they promote another one of these programs. That's what has to happen. If a corporation uh, does something really social justice warrior left, what has to happen is they have to be burned by that. And it's sort of the strike thing. I'm not a big fan of just the strike. I have other ideas on exactly how that stuff can be executed. But again, it's not something I want to discuss on a live show.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think they just used the pandemic for a power grab, like you were
Right.
saying. So that brings me to my next question, because this is a really big problem. We've seen that there's been a huge lowering in birth rates in the United States after this pandemic happened. So is the lowering of the U.S. birth rates making the U.S. economy retract?
Well, you're going to have fewer people to produce goods and services. So you're getting current generations, which will get older, and there's going to be less of a support group. So that's clearly not going to help the economy. But on the other hand, there's a lot of capital goods here, so you can have a flow of people that if their work is now there's a big problem with bringing people over and putting them on welfare and giving them free health care and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's a problem. But if you bring them over here to work, then the capital is here, the sort of the structure is here. So bring them over to work.
So should the income tax be abolished?
I'm in favor of abolishing anything that government does. So I have no problem abolishing the income tax. We don't need it. Everything can be done on a private sector uh, road. I wrote a book called Foundations of Private Property Society, um, Anarchy for the Civilized Person. And basically that explains how pretty much everything can be done from a private sector perspective, including quote unquote national defense, and why national defense, the way it's structured now, is a bad idea. There are ways to do it where you really don't end up with $500 toilets and whatever else the Pentagon is buying these days.
So how can we
Leave it to the
enlarge?
free markets.
How
I'm
can we
sorry.
how can we enlarge the U.S. economy?
How can by just eliminating all these government regulations? Whenever you have areas of central power, the bad guys get control of central power. That's just the basic rule. They will do anything. The guy that is trying to run a decent business is not thinking in terms of how do I get control of the central power to push out my competitors. The guy that's doing good business is thinking, you know, I can do this, that'll benefit me. This customers are going to like this. Customers are going to like that. That's not the guy that tends to succeed when there's strong central power. It's the guy that will get close to the power and he'll say, look, that guy over there who's actually helping customers has to be stopped. Put this regulation in, put that regulation in. That's the problem with with central power. So
Yeah,
you get rid of the regulations, get rid of the government agencies,
right.
and you're a long way to seeing an economy explode.
So we see a huge unelected bureaucracy, like you were saying, tax collectors, police officers, they're unelected. So do you believe that these, members of the bureaucracy, like police officers and tax collectors, should be elected by the people?
No, I think it should be privatized. It makes no sense to have a public sector police department. I think actually most police probably want to do a decent job, and they're in a structure which causes them to uh, do politically correct things, enforce politically correct laws, all kinds of nonsense instead of fighting real crime. I don't think it's the actual police people; it's the structure. You need to eliminate government from the picture and make it private sector police. I would never hire a cop who's not going to protect me. I want a cop who protects me. Simple. It solves the problem.
Yeah. Can you tell the viewers where they can find you?
Sure. My uh, I've got two websites. One is called economicpolicyjournal.com. That's economicpolicyjournal.com. And then which I talk mostly about the economy. And then my more radical site where you get a lot of the stuff I talked about in the second half of this show is at Target Liberty, which is targetliberty.com. And I've got a couple of books out. As I said, Foundations for Private Property Society, which I make a case for, again, where everything can be privatized, including national defense. National defense would look completely different than it does now, would cost a lot less, and would actually protect you. So that's Foundations of Private Property Society. Um, and you can find that on Amazon. The full title is Foundations of Private Property Society for the uh, now I forget the name of it. Foundations of Private Property Society, Anarchism for the Civilized Person. I've also got a book out about the Federal Reserve called The Fed Flunks. That's also available on Amazon. And I've got a new book out now, which looks into modern monetary theory, which is a new fad that's out there that deficits don't matter and you can just print any amount of money as you want. And uh, that book is also out there. So it's all available at Amazon. And with that, you'll find me on Twitter. I'm at Wenzel Economics, Wenzel Economics, at Wenzel Economics.
So everyone, please check out Robert's books and his website, and also look him up on Twitter. And thank you for being on the show, Robert. And I hope we can have you on the show again soon.
Sure, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Take
Okay.
care, Alexander.
Thank you for everyone who's watching.